The sound of shattered glass echoed through the quiet street as a gang of masked men surrounded two young black women, their malicious laughter cutting through the cold night. "Well, well, what do we have here?" one of them sneered, his voice dripping with hate. The twin sisters, Alana and Tia, stood firm, their eyes locking in silent communication. They had faced ignorance before, but this was different. These men weren't just looking for trouble. They were looking to humiliate, to hurt, to destroy. What the gang didn't know was that these weren't just any women. Alana and Tia were trained killers, elite Special Forces operatives who had spent years dismantling threats far more dangerous than a group of racist thugs. But tonight, they weren't wearing their uniforms. Tonight, they were just two sisters who had had enough. What happened next would leave the gang, and anyone who heard the story, questioning everything they thought they knew about power, justice, and strength. Would you believe me if I told you that by the end of the night, the ones who thought they held all the power were the ones begging for mercy? Stay with me, because this is a story you'll never forget. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. It wasn't just another night out for Alana and Tia Johnson. It was a rare moment to breathe. The twins had lived lives most people couldn't even imagine. Lives filled with danger, discipline, and secrets. But tonight, they were just sisters, walking home from their favorite diner, laughing about childhood memories and dreams they never had time to chase. From the outside, they looked like any other pair of young black women, Alana with her confident stride and Tia with her quiet, observant demeanor. No one would guess the truth about them, not even if they looked closely. Because how could anyone imagine that beneath their seemingly ordinary exteriors, these two women were among the most highly trained operatives in the world? Their hands had saved lives, taken lives, and written the kind of history that could never be taught in schools. But they never flaunted it. Humility and control were part of the job, and they wore it like armor. Tonight, though, their armor was off. They had no idea that the shadows following them were about to drag them into a fight they hadn't chosen. A fight they would finish. But how far would they go to prove that respect isn't optional? Keep watching, because what happens next is a masterclass in justice. "Hey, you two think you can just walk through our neighborhood?" The voice came out of nowhere, sharp and laced with menace. Alana and Tia stopped in their tracks, their instincts kicking in. 5 men emerged from the shadows, their faces partially hidden under hoods. The leader, a tall, wiry man with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepped forward, twirling a baseball bat casually in his hand. "Looks like you got lost, huh? Don't worry, we'll show you the way out," he sneered, his gang laughing behind him. The twins exchanged a glance, their unspoken bond speaking louder than words. They weren't lost. They were being hunted. "Look, we don't want any trouble," Tia said calmly, her voice steady but firm. "Trouble?" the man barked a laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, you are the trouble, thinking you can stroll around here like you own the place. How about we teach you a lesson?" The group tightened their circle, the air thick with hostility. Alana clenched her fists, biting back the urge to respond. She'd seen this before, men fueled by hate, thinking strength came from numbers. But she also knew something they didn't. Strength came from discipline. One of the men spat on the ground near their feet. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" "Oh, wait, you're probably used to staying silent, huh?" The words stung, not because they were hurtful, but because they were so familiar. It was the same old story, judged not for who they were, but for what others assumed. But these men had made one grave mistake. They assumed wrong. Because the twins weren't just going to walk away. They weren't going to run, either. They were going to end this. And the ending wasn't going to be what anyone expected. "You really don't want to do this," Alana said, her voice low but carrying a weight that made the gang momentarily pause. She wasn't pleading. She was warning. "Oh, I think we do," the leader shot back, taking another step closer. What are you going to do? Call for help? Tia tilted her head slightly, her eyes scanning the group with clinical precision. She wasn't just looking at them, she was analyzing them. The way one held his knife too loose, the way another's stance betrayed his inexperience. She could dismantle them all in seconds if it came to that. Help? Tia said, finally breaking her silence. We don't need help. The men laughed, but it was cut short as Alana took a single step forward. Do you know what happens when you corner someone who's been trained to fight their way out of war zones? She asked, her tone calm but carrying an edge that sent a chill through the group. War zones, one of the men mocked, trying to hide his unease. What, you think you're some kind of soldier or something? Alana's lips curled into a faint, dangerous smile. Something like that. Before they could respond, Tia spoke up. You wanted a lesson, right? She asked, her voice deceptively soft. Let us teach you one. The twins didn't look like soldiers, not in their casual clothes, not with their unassuming demeanor. But as they subtly shifted their stances, a new energy filled the air, one that radiated control, strength, and an undeniable sense of danger. The gang had no idea they were standing in front of two of the military's most elite operatives, women who had undergone years of brutal training, faced enemies far deadlier than anything these men could imagine, and emerged victorious every time. But these men were about to find out, because the real fight hadn't even started yet. The tension in the air was suffocating, the kind that made even the bravest hesitate. The gang shuffled nervously as Alana and Tia stood motionless, their calm composure unnerving. You think you're tough, huh? The leader growled, but his voice faltered slightly. He gripped the bat tighter, as if it would somehow give him back control of the situation. Alana tilted her head, her eyes cold and calculating. Tough? She echoed. No, we're trained. There's a difference. In a blur of movement, she stepped forward, snatching the bat from his hand with a speed that didn't seem possible. The gang froze, their bravado replaced by confusion and fear. Who are you? One of them stammered, taking a step back. Tia stepped closer, her voice calm but commanding. Let's just say, we've seen men like you before, but they weren't lucky enough to walk away. The leader's bravado crumbled. You're bluffing, he spat, but even he didn't seem convinced by his own words. You think so? Alana asked, twirling the bat effortlessly before snapping it in half with her bare hands. The sound of splintering wood was deafening in the silence, and the gang flinched. But this wasn't just about intimidation. The twins weren't the type to act without understanding the full scope of the threat. Their military instincts kicked in, and they began to assess the gang's dynamic. The leader's attempts to maintain control, the silent one who kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, and the youngest, who looked like he wanted to run but didn't dare. Tia leaned in slightly. You're not just a group of bullies, are you? She said, her tone almost curious. There's something bigger going on here. Who sent you? The youngest one's face twitched, his guilt almost palpable, but the leader barked, Shut up, Danny. Alana's eyes narrowed. Danny, is it? She said, her voice soft but laced with authority. You don't look like you belong here. What's your story? Danny's gaze darted between the twins and the leader, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his trembling hands told another story. The twins exchanged a glance. They had seen this before, a pawn trapped in a game much larger than himself, and they weren't about to let him go without answers. But before they could press further, the leader shouted, Enough of this, and lunged forward. The fight was about to explode, and the truth they were chasing was just within reach. Would they uncover it before the night spiraled completely out of control? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything. The leader lunged at Alana with a roar, swinging wildly with a knife he'd drawn from his belt. But Alana didn't flinch. With a swift, calculated motion, she sidestepped the attack, grabbed his wrist, and disarmed him with such precision it was as if time itself had slowed. The knife clattered to the ground, and she shoved him backward effortlessly. Stay down, Alana said coldly, her voice as sharp as the blade now lying at her feet. The rest of the gang froze, their confidence shattered. But the leader wasn't done. "You think you've won?" he spat, struggling to his feet. "You don't know who you're messing with." Tia stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with authority. "No, you don't know who we are, and that's your biggest mistake." As she spoke, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small patch, the unmistakable emblem of the elite special forces. The gang stared at it, their faces draining of color. "Special forces?" one of the men whispered in disbelief, taking a step back. "You've spent your lives preying on people you think are weaker than you," Tia continued, her voice steady but brimming with controlled fury. "But we've spent our lives protecting those people and stopping threats like you." The leader's bravado crumbled entirely. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he blurted, panic seeping into his voice. Alana's eyes narrowed. "What wasn't supposed to happen? Talk." Danny, the youngest of the group, finally broke. "It wasn't our idea," he cried, his voice trembling. "We were told to scare you off, make sure you didn't come back through this area." "Who told you?" Alana demanded, her tone razor-sharp. Danny hesitated, but one look at the twins and he cracked. It's a local group. They pay us to keep certain people out. People like you. They didn't tell us you'd fight back like this." Alana's jaw tightened, her mind racing. This wasn't just a random attack. This was part of something bigger, a coordinated effort to intimidate and control, to use hate as a weapon. Tia stepped closer to the leader, who was now visibly shaking. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? That no one will stand up to you? Well, guess what? You picked the wrong targets." The leader tried to speak, but no words came. The fear in his eyes said it all. He had underestimated them in every possible way. Alana's voice broke the silence. "We're not just here to fight back. We're here to end this. And believe me, you'll regret the day you crossed our path." What followed would send shockwaves through the entire operation. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of their fight for justice. Keep watching, because the resolution will leave you speechless. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled the end of the confrontation, but not the end of the story. Alana and Tia stood tall, their breath steady, while the gang lay crumpled on the ground, immobilized and disarmed. The twins had fought with precision, not out of anger, but out of a deep-rooted sense of justice and duty. They had proved that true strength wasn't just about power, it was about control, about knowing when to fight and when to stand your ground. As the police arrived and began securing the gang members, Danny stepped forward, his shoulders slumped, defeated. He looked at Alana and Tia with something new in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also a strange respect. I didn't know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know who you were. I thought you were just regular people." "People like us," Tia said, her voice soft but firm, "are the ones who take the hits, the ones who have to fight just to be seen as human. And that's something you'll understand now. Every time you try to tear someone down, remember, you don't know what they're capable of. You don't know what they've been through." The leader, still on the ground, looked up at Alana, defeated but defiant. "You think you've won," he spat, struggling to breathe. "No," Alana said, kneeling down beside him, her voice low and steady. "We didn't win. We're just here to make sure people like you don't get to keep hurting others. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But this is where it ends for you." The moral was clear, not just for the men on the ground, but for anyone who might be watching too. The real power wasn't in the ability to hurt, it was in the ability to stand up when the world tried to break you down. It was in choosing integrity over revenge, resilience over rage. The twins had proven that the system didn't have to dictate who you were, and that no matter how deep the injustice, it could always be undone with the right kind of strength. As the police led the gang away, the twins exchanged a look. the weight of the night's events settling in. They hadn't just survived, they had fought for something bigger than themselves. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Because the greatest fight was never against the ones who attacked you. It was against the ones who tried to silence you. And tonight, Alana and Tia had proven that no matter the odds, you should never be underestimated. The true battle for justice was only just beginning. And they were ready for it. Thank you for watching. Maya's story reminds us that standing up for what's right can create lasting change. Whether it's overcoming adversity or challenging injustice, your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on the story. Let's keep this conversation going. And remember, sharing these stories helps spread the message of justice and fairness, one act of courage at a time. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.